I never thought a simple act of kindness would lead to me losing my own home while I was still paying the mortgage. If you think you know your neighbors, think again. Stick around because what I found behind my own front door and the truth about the sweet old man next door will make you want to change your locks tonight. Before we dive into this nightmare, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. At the end, I want you to tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted a neighbor with your keys and regretted it? I'd love to hear your stories. They say your 30s are supposed to be your prime, but for me, 33 felt like one long caffeinated blur. My name is Elena, and I've spent the last decade climbing the corporate ladder in commercial real estate. It's a world of steel, glass, and constant deadlines. By March, I was running on fumes. I hadn't had a real vacation in 3 years, and my apartment, my beautiful sanctuary-like 2-bedroom in the suburbs, was starting to feel more like a storage unit for my work blazers. When my boss finally cleared me for a 10-day retreat to a quiet cabin upstate, I almost cried with relief. I needed silence, I needed trees, but mostly I needed someone to look after my pride and joy, my indoor jungle. I have over 40 exotic plants, including a rare Monstera variegata that I've raised since it was a single leaf. That's where Mr. Henderson came in. Arthur Henderson had lived in 4B, right across the hall from me, for as long as I'd been in the building. He was 75, always wore a beige cardigan, and smelled faintly of peppermint and old books. He was the kind of neighbor who brought in your mail if it was poking out of the slot, and always had a gentle comment about the weather. Everyone loved him. He was the unofficial grandfather of the 4th floor. "Oh, Elena, it would be my absolute pleasure," he told me when I asked him to water the plants. He gave me that warm, crinkly-eyed smile that made you feel instantly safe. "You just go and get some rest, dear. You work far too hard. I'll make sure your green friends are happy and healthy when you get back." I felt a twinge of guilt even asking him, but he insisted. I handed him my spare key, gave him a quick rundown of the watering schedule, and headed out with a light heart. The retreat was supposed to be 10 days, but on the 5th night, a massive storm knocked out the power at the cabin resort. With no Wi-Fi, no heat, and the roads turning into slush, the management decided to close the main lodge. I figured it was a sign from the universe. I was rested enough, and the idea of my own bed suddenly seemed more appealing than a freezing cabin. I didn't call Mr. Henderson. I wanted it to be a surprise. Maybe I'd catch him mid-watering and we could have a nice cup of tea as a thank you. I pulled into my apartment complex at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, dragging my suitcase through the lobby. When I reached the 4th floor, I noticed something odd. There was a faint scent in the hallway. It wasn't Mr. Henderson's peppermint. It was something heavy, like cheap cologne and burnt popcorn. I reached my door, 4C, and slid my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, wiggling it. Maybe the humidity had swelled the door? I tried again, harder. Nothing. Then I heard a noise from inside. Muffled voices. A man's laugh followed by the clink of glass. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had I been robbed? Did Mr. Henderson leave the door unlocked? I hammered my fist against the wood. "Hello? Is someone in there?" The voices stopped. Dead silence. A moment later, I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding back, a sound I didn't recognize because I hadn't installed a new deadbolt. The door cracked open, held by a security chain I also didn't recognize. A young man, maybe in his early 20s, looked out at me. He was wearing a t-shirt and holding a slice of pizza. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking annoyed. "Can you help me?" I stammered, my voice rising. "This is my apartment. Who are you?" He rolled his eyes. "Look, lady, if you're the cleaning service, you're early. Checkout isn't until 11 a.m. tomorrow. We paid for the full night through the app." "App? What app?" I felt the world tilt. "The STAYOK app," he said, holding up his phone. "We rented this place for the week. Look, talk to the host, RDH. We're just trying to watch a movie." He slammed the door in my face. I stood there in the hallway staring at my own nameplate on the wall, while the realization washed over me like ice water. RDH. Arthur Henderson, my sweet neighbor, wasn't just watering my plants. He had turned my home into a hotel. I dropped my suitcase and marched across the hall to 4B. I didn't knock, I pounded. "Mr. Henderson, Arthur, open this door right now." The door opened slowly. Arthur stood there in his pajamas, looking confused and frail. "Elena, dear? You're back early. Is everything all right?" "Is everything all right?" I hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my door. "There are strangers in my living room, Arthur. They say they rented my apartment from you. Explain yourself." Arthur's face went pale. For a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not confusion, but a sharp, cold calculation. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced with a look of devastating shame. "Oh, Elena, we were just... Oh, dear, I can explain. Please, come inside. I've made a terrible, terrible mistake." But as I stepped into his apartment, I realized the mistake was much larger than a few rented nights. Because on his dining room table, laid out like a deck of cards, were dozens of spare keys. Each one had a different unit number written on a little white tag, and that was only the beginning. I stood in Arthur's entryway, my breath catching in my throat. The sight of those keys, dozens of them, neatly organized by floor and apartment number, made the hair on my arms stand up. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a business. My sweet neighbor was running a rogue hotel operation using the entire building's spare keys. "Arthur," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and pure shock, "what is this? Are you telling me you're renting out half the building while people are at work or on vacation?" Arthur sank into his recliner, looking every bit the frail old man he pretended to be. He covered his face with his hands, let out a long, shaky sigh, and then looked up at me with watery eyes. "Elena, please, sit down. You have to understand. The pension, it's not what it used to be. The building fees went up again this year, and I was terrified. I thought they would evict me. I didn't know what to do." I didn't sit. I stayed rooted to the spot, staring at the key to 5A, 3F, 2B. "So you decided to become a digital squatter? You let strangers into my home. People were eating pizza on my sofa. They've probably been in my bed." The thought made my stomach churn. My sanctuary, the one place I felt safe after 60-hour work weeks, had been turned into a commodity for 20-year-olds with a Stay OK app. "I only chose the most responsible-looking people," he whimpered, reaching out a hand as if to pat my arm. I stepped back. "And I made sure they only stayed while you were away. I had it all timed out, Elena. You weren't supposed to be back until Sunday. I was going to have the professional cleaners in on Saturday morning. You never would have known." "Professional cleaners?" I laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "Arthur, you changed my locks. I couldn't even get into my own home." "For security, dear, to make the guests feel safe. I was going to swap the deadbolt back before you arrived. It takes me 5 minutes. I've done it dozens of times." The casual way he said dozens of times hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't his first time. He had a system. He was a pro. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone in my pocket. "No, please, Elena, don't." Arthur scrambled out of his chair with surprising agility for a man his age. He blocked the door, his face pale. "If you call them, they'll take everything. I'll lose my home. I'm an old man. Where will I go? Think of all the years we've been neighbors. I helped you when your pipes burst. I watched your mail." "You watched my mail to see when I'd be out of town," I snapped. "Move, Arthur, I mean it." But Arthur didn't move. Instead, his expression shifted. The whimpering, frail old man persona began to melt away, revealing something harder underneath. His back straightened, and his voice lost its tremor. "You really don't want to do that, Elena," he said quietly. His tone wasn't pleading anymore. It was a warning. "Are you threatening me?" I couldn't believe it. My 75-year-old neighbor was standing his ground like a common thug. "I'm just saying that I know a lot about this building, and a lot about the people in it, including you." He gestured toward his computer desk where a series of monitors sat dark. You think I just water plants. I keep this place running. I know who comes and goes. I know who's cheating on their spouse, who's ducking the IRS, and who, well, let's just say I know exactly how you managed to afford that promotion last year, Elena. My heart stopped. My promotion had been hard-earned, but there was a messy situation with a client, a non-disclosure agreement that was strictly confidential. There was no way he could know about that. You're bluffing, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Am I? Arthur smiled, and for the first time, it didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, predatory curve of the lips. Go ahead, call the police. Tell them I'm renting out rooms. I'll go to jail for a few months, maybe, but before I go, I'll make sure every email, every private conversation I've overheard through these thin walls finds its way to the right people. Your career would be over before my first bail hearing. I felt like the walls were closing in. I was standing in the apartment of a man I thought I knew, realizing I was trapped. He wasn't just a landlord of a ghost hotel, he was a collector of secrets. "What do you want?" I whispered. "I want you to go to a hotel for the night," Arthur said, his voice returning to that gentle grandfatherly hum. "I'll pay for it. Tomorrow morning my guests will check out. I will clean your apartment personally. I'll put your old lock back on, and we will go back to being the best of neighbors. No harm, no foul." I looked at the keys on the table. I looked at the coldness in his eyes. I realized then that Arthur Henderson wasn't just a desperate pensioner, he was a wolf in a beige cardigan. I grabbed my suitcase handle and turned toward the door. I didn't say a word. I walked out of 4B, the sound of his door clicking shut behind me echoing like a gunshot. I didn't go to a hotel. I sat in my car in the dark parking lot, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't let him win. But I couldn't just call the cops if he really had dirt on me. I needed to know how he was doing it. How did he know so much? I looked up at the building. Lights were on in 4C, my apartment. Strangers were in there, sleeping in my bed, while the grandfather of the building watched from across the hall. I pulled out my laptop and opened a private browser. If Arthur was using an app to rent the place, there was a digital trail. I searched for Stay OK and filtered for our neighborhood. It didn't take long to find it. Luxury urban retreat, high floor. The photos were of my living room, my plants, my designer rug. But as I scrolled through the host's other listings, my blood ran cold. He didn't just have 1 or 2 listings, he had 15, all in our building. And in the reviews, one guest had written, "Great stay, but it felt a bit weird that the host knew exactly when we arrived and left without us telling him. It's like he was watching." Another review said, "The arty guy is super nice, but the apartment had some weird tech in the clocks. Still, great price." "Weird tech in the clocks," I whispered. I looked back at the building, specifically at Arthur's window. He wasn't just a neighbor, he was a voyeur. And if he was watching the guests, he had been watching me too, for years. I knew I couldn't wait until morning. I needed to get back into my apartment while those guests were there. I needed to find what Arthur had hidden in my home before he had the chance to clean it. I waited until 2 a.m. The lights in 4C finally went out. I took a deep breath, grabbed a heavy flashlight from my glove box, and headed back inside. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. If Arthur wanted to play a game of secrets, he was about to find out that I was much better at real estate than he was. But as I reached the 4th floor, I saw something that changed everything. The door to 4B, Arthur's apartment, was wide open, and the sounds coming inside wasn't the sound of an old man sleeping, it was the sound of someone frantically shredding paper. I stood in the darkened hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The rhythmic whir crunch of a paper shredder echoed out of Arthur's open door. Why would a man who supposedly had everything under control be shredding documents at 2 in the morning? The frail old man was clearly panicking. I crept closer, staying in the shadows. From my angle, I could see into his living room. Arthur wasn't in his cardigan anymore. He was wearing a dark tracksuit, moving with a frantic energy that stripped away his grandfatherly mask. He was dumping folders into the machine, his eyes darting to a row of tablet screens glowing on his desk. I realized then that if I didn't act now, whatever evidence he had of his business and whatever leverage he held over me would be dust by sunrise. I didn't go into his apartment. Instead, I used my knowledge of the building's layout. The electrical room for the fourth floor was tucked behind a service panel near the elevator. If I couldn't get into my apartment because of his new lock, and I couldn't confront him while he was armed with my secrets, I would force him out. I opened the panel and found the breakers for 4B and 4C. With a deep breath, I flipped them both. The hallway went silent. The shredder ground to a halt. The glow from Arthur's tablets vanished. "What the?" I heard him mutter from inside. A moment later, Arthur appeared in his doorway, holding a high-powered flashlight. He looked agitated, his shadow stretching long and distorted against the hallway wallpaper. He didn't look like a sweet neighbor anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He began walking toward the electrical panel, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark like a blade. This was my chance. While he was busy fumbling with the breakers, I slipped past him and headed straight for my own door, 4C. I knew the young man inside had mentioned a security chain, but I also knew these old building doors had a flaw. If you shook them hard enough while the chain was engaged, the slide would often pop out of the track. I didn't shake it. I leaned my shoulder into it with every bit of frustration I'd built up over the last 3 years of overtime and missed holidays. Crack. The wood didn't break, but the cheap screws Arthur had used for the security chain ripped right out of the frame. I stumbled into my own entryway. "Hey, who is that?" a groggy voice shouted from the bedroom. I didn't stop to explain. I flipped my own internal breaker back on from the box behind the door. Arthur had only flipped the external one. The lights hissed to life. The young man from earlier ran out into the hallway, squinting against the light. "Lady, what are you doing? I told you we paid." "Out!" I yelled, pointing to the door. "This is my home. This man, Arthur, is a criminal. He doesn't own this place, and neither do you. If you aren't out in 60 seconds, the police will be here to arrest you for trespassing. Move." The girl who was with him appeared in the bedroom doorway, wrapping a coat over her pajamas. They looked terrified. They didn't argue. They grabbed their bags, throwing clothes in haphazardly, and bolted past me. As they ran out, they nearly collided with Arthur, who was standing in the hallway, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked dangerous. "You shouldn't have done that, Elena," he said, his voice low and steady. "I told you what would happen." "The game is over, Arthur," I said, backing into my apartment and grabbing a heavy glass vase from the entry table. "I'm in my house now, and I'm looking for the clucks." His eyes widened for a split second. That was all the confirmation I needed. I slammed my door and locked it, using the original deadbolts that he actually hadn't replaced, only supplemented with a smart lock he'd stuck over the handle. I tore that electronic piece of junk off the door and threw it in the corner. Then I started searching. I went to the mantelpiece where my grandmother's antique clock sat. I turned it over. Nothing. I checked the kitchen wall clock. Nothing. Then I looked at the digital alarm clock on my bedside table, an upgrade Arthur had given me as a housewarming gift a year ago. I smashed it on the floor. Nested inside the plastic casing among the wires and chips was a tiny, wide-angle camera lens. It was connected to a small Wi-Fi transmitter. My stomach turned. He hadn't just been renting my place. He had been watching me sleep. He had been watching me dress. He had been recording my private life for a year. But it wasn't just a camera. There was a small SD card tucked into a slot. I grabbed my laptop, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. I inserted the card. I expected to see videos of me walking through my living room in my pajamas, me crying on the phone after a hard day, me just living. But as I scrolled further back, the files changed. They weren't from my apartment. Arthur had been moving these gift clocks around the entire building. There were folders labeled by apartment number, 4A, 5C, 2B, and then I saw a folder labeled Building Management, Ledger. I opened it and felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just dirt on the tenants. Arthur had been intercepting the building's financial records. He knew that the management company was embezzling funds from the repair budget, the very fees he claimed were forcing him into this life of crime. He wasn't just a voyeur or a fake landlord. He was a blackmailer. He was using the dirt he gathered on the tenants to keep them quiet, and the dirt he had on management to ensure they never looked too closely at his stay okay listings. Suddenly, a loud thud came from my front door. Then another. "Elena!" Arthur's voice came through the wood. It was calm, almost soothing, which made it 10 times more terrifying. "I know you found the card, but you have to realize, if that card goes to the police, everyone goes down. The management, the neighbors, and yes, you. Do you really want to lose your career over a little privacy violation?" I looked at the screen. I looked at the folder with my name on it. He was right. There was stuff on there that would be hard to explain to my board of directors. But then I saw a file at the very bottom of the card, dated only 2 days ago. The title was Basement, Storage Unit 12. I clicked it. The video showed Arthur in the basement moving a heavy floorboard in the corner of his storage unit. Underneath wasn't just more keys or cameras. It was a stack of passports, dozens of them, all with different names but the same few faces. Arthur wasn't just a lonely old man. He was part of something much, much bigger, and I was currently locked in a room with the only evidence that could stop him. The thudding on the door stopped. For a moment, I thought he had given up. Then I heard the sound of a key sliding into the lock. The original lock. The one key I thought only I had. "I told you, Elena," Arthur whispered from the other side. "I have all the keys." The sound of that key sliding into the lock was the most terrifying thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't the slow fumbling of an old man. It was the precise, metallic click of someone who had done this 1,000 times. My heart felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. I had the vase in one hand and my laptop in the other, backed up against the far wall of my bedroom. The door swung open. Arthur stepped in, but he wasn't alone. Standing behind him was a man I recognized from the building's maintenance crew, a guy named Victor who usually handled the boilers. Victor wasn't smiling. He was holding a heavy crowbar, and his eyes were cold, professional. "Give me the card, Elena," Arthur said. His voice was no longer that of a neighbor. It was the voice of a CEO. "You've seen too much, and frankly, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. I liked you. You were quiet, you worked late, and you never asked questions. Why start now?" "Who are you, Arthur?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Those passports, those aren't just for renting rooms. You're moving people. You're running some kind of identity ring through this building." Arthur sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "The world is a messy place, Elena. People need to disappear and people need to reappear as someone else. This building is a perfect transit point. High turnover, busy professionals who don't know their neighbors, and a management company that I personally own through 3 shell corporations." My jaw dropped. He didn't just have dirt on management, he was the management. The frail old pensioner was a ghost, a front for a criminal enterprise that had been operating right under my nose for years. "Victor," Arthur nodded toward me, "take the laptop. Gently. We don't want to break the hardware until we're sure she hasn't uploaded anything to the cloud." Victor stepped forward. I tightened my grip on the vase. "Stay back. I've already sent an email. If I don't check in, it goes to the police." It was a lie, and Arthur knew it. He looked at the router on my shelf. The internet light was dark. He had cut the line from the hallway before coming in. "You're a smart girl, Elena, but you're out of your league," Arthur said. "Victor, the laptop, now." As Victor reached for it, I didn't swing the vase. Instead, I threw the laptop, not at him, but through the large glass window leading to the fire escape. The crash was deafening. The laptop tumbled 4 stories down into the dark alleyway. Victor cursed and lunged toward the window, looking down. "You idiot!" Arthur hissed, his composure finally breaking. "Go! Get it before someone sees!" Victor didn't hesitate. He scrambled out onto the fire escape, his heavy boots clanging on the metal as he descended. For a split second, it was just me and Arthur. Arthur looked at me, his face turning a deep, angry purple. "That was a mistake, Elena, a very expensive mistake." He reached into his tracksuit pocket, and for a moment I thought he was pulling out a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small black remote. He pressed a button, and a high-pitched whine filled the room. Suddenly, my smart home system, the lights, the thermostat, the integrated speakers, began to haywire. The lights strobed violently, and a deafening static blasted from the speakers I used for my morning jazz. "I built this smart building, Elena. I control every wire in these walls. You think you're safe in your sanctuary? You're in a cage." I tripped over my rug, blinded by the flashing lights. My head hit the edge of the coffee table and the world went blurry. I could see Arthur's silhouette moving toward me, slow and methodical. He didn't need to rush. I had nowhere to go. But as I lay there, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic under the sofa. It was the Stay OK smart lock I had ripped off the door earlier. It was still synced to my phone, which was tucked into my back pocket. I remembered something the young man had said. The host knew exactly when we arrived and left. The lock had a GPS log, and more importantly, it had a 2-way intercom feature for guest check-ins that worked on an independent cellular chip so guests could call for help even if the Wi-Fi was down. With my vision swimming, I fumbled for my phone. I didn't call 911. Arthur would hear me. I opened the Stay OK app I had downloaded in the car. I hit emergency support and open intercom. "Help!" I screamed, not into the room, but directly into the microphone of the phone. "Apartment 4C, 1202 Oak Street. He's going to kill me. Arthur Henderson is..." Arthur lunged, his hand slamming down on my wrist, pinning my arm to the floor. The phone skittered across the hardwood. "Who are you talking to?" he growled, his face inches from mine. The mask was completely gone now. He looked monstrous. "The app," I gasped, wincing in pain. "The support line, they record everything." Arthur froze. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He knew how these apps worked. They were designed to protect the company from liability. Every emergency call was logged, recorded, and immediately flagged for local authorities. "You're a smart girl, Elena," he whispered. He raised his hand, but before he could strike, a heavy thud echoed from the hallway, then another. It wasn't the police. It was the other neighbors. The strobe lights and the deafening static had woken up the entire 4th floor. People were pounding on my door, calling my name. Arthur looked at the door, then back at me. He had a choice: finish me and get caught by a dozen witnesses, or run. He chose to run. He bolted for the fire escape, following Victor into the night. I scrambled to the door and threw it open. My neighbor from 4A, a nurse named Sarah, caught me before I collapsed. "Elena, what happened?" We heard the screaming through the speakers. "The basement," I choked out, pointing toward the elevator. "Storage unit 12. Don't let him get to the basement." As the neighbors scrambled to help, I looked at my phone. The Stay OK support agent was still on the line, their voice small and tinny. "Ma'am, we have alerted the authorities. Officers are 3 minutes. Please stay on the line." But as I sat there, shivering in Sarah's arms, I realized something. Arthur didn't just run to escape. He ran to destroy. If he got to that basement before the police, he wasn't just taking the passports, he was taking the delete key to the entire building's secrets. And I knew exactly what he was planning to do to make sure no one ever talked. I stood up, pushing past the crowd. "I have to go down there," I whispered. "He's going to burn it all down." The smoke was the first thing I smelled as the elevator doors groaned open in the basement. It wasn't the smell of a cozy fireplace. It was the acrid, chemically stench of burning plastic and old paper. The fire alarm began to wail, a piercing shriek that echoed off the concrete walls. Arthur wasn't just running, he was erasing his life's work, and he didn't care if the whole building went up with it. I ran towards storage unit 12. The heavy metal mesh door was swung wide, and inside, a small mountain of documents was already engulfed in flames. Arthur was there, silhouetted against the orange glow, frantically throwing more ledgers and hard drives into the fire. Victor was nowhere to be seen, likely already gone with whatever essentials they could carry. "Arthur, stop!" I screamed, shielding my face from the heat. "The police are upstairs. You're going to kill everyone in the building." He turned, and for a second, I didn't recognize him. His face was smeared with soot, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked like a man who had lost his soul long before he lost his secret. "They won't find anything, Elena," he croaked, his voice raw from the smoke. "By the time they put this out, I'll be a different person in a different city. And you'll just be another victim of an unfortunate electrical fire. Tragic, really." He lunged at me, not with a weapon, but with the sheer desperation of a cornered predator. We struggled near the edge of the blaze. He was surprisingly strong, his hands like iron as they clamped around my throat. I thrashed, my lungs burning from the smoke, my vision beginning to tunnel. My hand hit a heavy metal fire extinguisher mounted on the pillar next to us. With the last of my strength, I ripped it from the bracket and swung it blindly. Clang! The heavy canister caught him squarely on the side of the head. Arthur crumpled, sliding to the floor as the fire roared higher, licking at the wooden rafters above. I didn't stop. I pulled the pin on the extinguisher and squeezed the lever, the white chemical foam hissing out and smothering the flames that were inches from his unconscious body. I hated him, but I couldn't watch a human being burn, even a monster like him. The sound of heavy boots and shouting filled the stairwell. "Police, get down on the ground!" I dropped the extinguisher and fell to my knees, gasping for clean air as the SWAT team swarmed the basement. They dragged Arthur away, and a medic rushed toward me, wrapping a blanket around my shaking shoulders. In the weeks that followed, the story dominated the local news. The sweet old man of Oak Street was actually a high-level facilitator for an international smuggling ring. They found a hidden compartment behind a false wall in his storage unit containing nearly $2 million in cash and encrypted servers that held the secrets of hundreds of people. The building management was dismantled. Half the board of directors ended up in handcuffs. As for me, the incriminating files Arthur had on me were recovered by the FBI. When I explained the context, the blackmail and the surveillance, the authorities viewed me as a witness, not a suspect. My career stayed intact, though I ended up quitting that high-stress job anyway. Life is too short to spend 60 hours a week in a glass box. I moved out of that building a month later. I live in a small house with a big yard for my plants and a state-of-the-art security system that I installed myself. I still have a few of those exotic plants, including the monstera. It's thriving. Every time I meet a new neighbor, I'm polite, I smile, I wave, but if they ever ask for my spare key, I just smile and tell them I've had bad luck with water damage in the past. I hope this story kept you on the edge of your seat. It's a reminder that we never truly know who is living right across the hall. What did you think? Was Arthur's business more shocking than you expected? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a creepy neighbor experience. I'll be reading every single one. And if you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe for more dramatic stories every week. Until next time, stay safe and keep your doors locked.